All righty. Oh, gotta mute my laptop because I'm giving everyone an echo. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start. It is on? Starting the roll call. Councillor Craig Kassar. Not seeing him. Councillor Cameron Kretsch. Also not seeing him. Councillor Alex Wilson.
Hello.
I'm seeing you. Ian Borsick, that's me. I'm here. Gabby, are you here? Bayode Akamalafe? Not here. Adon Ammer? Not here. Jordan Boyer? Not here. Juliana Casimiri? I'm seeing you. Jeff Hardy? Sue Heenan? Thank you, Sue. Jillian Henry? Jesse Hudecki? Luciano Tono is not here. Aditya?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you, Aditya. Zach, I see you as well.
Yep, I'm here.
Frank Lenarduzzi, not seeing. Tristan McClure? Yep, I'm seeing Tristan online. Thank you, Tristan. Shelley Rempel? Mary Ellen Scanlon? Nope. Miles Surgent? Not seeing. Oh. Thank you for that. No, I was seeing Miles just joined. Aladia Smoke, I'm not seeing. Matthew Tuddy sent regrets. And then finally, Mary Luz, I believe you are online.
I'm here.
Thank you, Mary Luz. So we have quorum, and so I will call to order. As we have quorum present, I would like to call this meeting of the Climate Change Advisory Committee to order at 6:04 p.m. For those of us who are here in person, please remember that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. I will now move on and read the land acknowledgement. The City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered with the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and Mississaugas of Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Moving on to our next item, we have an approval of the agenda. The agenda was shared with us in advance and it's available to all. Do I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as presented? I'm seeing Sue and Gabby as seconder. Are there any amendments by committee members to the agenda? I'm seeing none. Oh, yes. Sorry, Beatrice.
Sorry, Chair. I just have to add 2 items to 7.1. So, just 1 minute.
No problem. Thank you.
It was to do with the working groups. So their updates, the individual working groups. So 7.1 to 7.4, I've added some new items there, and that's just updates, individual updates. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
7.4.
All righty, so we're all good. I didn't see any indications to amend the agenda, so could I just see indication of vote of support by raising your hands, either using the function on WebEx or just raising your hand so I can see you on the camera? Are there any abstentions or opposed? I'm seeing none. The motion is carried. We will move on. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm seeing none. So we'll carry on. First up is now approval of meeting minutes from the previous meeting. This was from our January 28th, 2025 meeting. Do I have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes of the January 28th meeting as presented? I'm seeing moved by Sue, seconded by Gabby. Is there any discussion on the minutes? I'm seeing none. And then all in favor to approve the minutes? Any opposed? I'm seeing none opposed. The motion is carried. We have no delegations for this meeting, so we're going to move on to item 7.1, the Urban Forest Strategy Update from staff. And I would like to welcome Robin Pollard, Manager of Forestry and Horticulture and Public Works, and they're here to present on the Urban Forest Strategy. Robin, I see that your presentation's already up. Do you want to just unmute to make sure that we can hear you?
Yep, hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, you're coming through great. So take it away, Robin. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it. So I'm going to give you a quick update on the City of Hamilton's Urban Forest Strategy Update. A request was made to come to the committee and give a kind of a high level. So happy to do that today. So I'm assuming I'm going to have to say next slide every time. So if that works.
Slight technical issue, but Beatrice is hearing you, no problem.
All good, all good. Okay, so I probably should introduce myself. So I'm Robin Pollard. I'm the Manager of Forestry and Horticulture. So I'll go through the update, and then I think we have some time for questions afterwards. So Hamilton's Urban Forest Strategy, or the UFS as we like to call it, was approved through Council in the summer of 2023. It began in 2017. Normally strategies of this sort don't take 6 years, but there was a lot of different reasons for taking six years. There was some staff turnover. Obviously, we had a pandemic. There was all sorts of things that kind of stood in the way, but eventually by 2023, we had it approved and moving forward. So the strategy includes an inventory of trees within the urban area. That's all of the public area, as well as an estimation of the private areas. It is a community developed vision for the desired state of the urban forest. It provided background research on existing policies, bylaws, programs, partnerships, and activities within Hamilton. It identified challenges and opportunities for improving the urban forest. It provided recommended actions, including programs, policies, and partnerships. And it recommended monitoring and indicators to determine if the UFS is meeting its vision. All good strategies should have a way of measuring their success, so that's also included in it. We can go to the next slide. So this comes directly from the strategy. If anybody's read it, which I'm hoping most of you have, you'll have seen these graphics. The City of Hamilton's urban forest vision is Hamilton's urban forest is resilient, contributes to the well-being of all neighborhoods, and is valued as a shared asset. You will note, if you're familiar with other strategies within the city, that there is a lot of overlap with the urban forest strategy and many other strategies that are approved, as well as items that are in draft. So a few that came to mind as I was thinking about this were the Biodiversity Action Plan, the Climate Action Strategy, the Parks Master Plan, the Complete Streets. Sorry, I had a dog beside me who decided he was going to make a lot of noise. The Complete Streets guidelines, the Green Building Standards, the Watershed Action Plan. All of these, if you read them if you read through the actions, if you read through the research that goes into them, I think that you'll see a lot of intersecting lines between the two strategies, which I believe is part of as a whole where the city is trying to go with many of these strategies, and we're all kind of moving towards a greener city where we all want to live. We can go to the next one. We can get into the progress. Okay, so within the strategy, there were 26 actions. 4 have been completed to date. They were pretty simple ones to tick off, and we have 22 in progress. For this group, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. So after the strategy was implemented and approved, the forestry section, so my group, we were gracious enough to take on 2 new FTEs. So we created a senior project manager of policy and preservation, and we created a project manager of forest health. So those two were direct actions that came out of the urban forest strategy, and they were hired in early 2024 and have been working through quite a few of these actions. Another completed action was the creation of an interdepartmental working group. So I've just listed a few departments that are within that group. So we have Public Works, Public Health, we have Planning and Economic Development, and we have the Communications team. We meet quarterly and we discuss the actions, we update on the 26 actions, we speak about where what we've completed, where we're at progress-wise, and where we're continuing on. We talk about the collaboration between the different groups, which is really inspiring to sit in on some of those working group meetings when you actually, you sit down and you think about how much forestry is related to public health and planning and all of these different groups. So we've really reduced the silo effect. The 22 actions we have in progress, I'm just highlighting a few here. So some of you may have seen the Engage Hamilton webpage. We've gotten into UFS branding. So what we're trying to do is ensure that when we go out to the public and we're trying to either educate them on something or celebrate a success, that we have some branding behind us so people really recognize that these actions are coming out of the UFS. So we've got logos and colors and quite a bit of work going on there. We've also partnered with the implementation of the Forest Health Monitoring Program is another item I wanted to highlight. Previously, prior to the UFS, it was very focused on spongy moth, or some people might know it as gypsy moth. And that was really at a high level as far as the monitoring program really went. Previous to that, it was the emerald ash borer. Now we've implemented a forest health monitoring program where we're looking at incoming threats. So we're monitoring for oak wilt in the woodlands. Hemlock woolly adelgid is something that's in Hamilton at this point, very localized within the Westdale area, but we are looking at all of the woodlands throughout Hamilton to make sure that we're on top of that. And spotted lanternfly obviously is a threat with it being just across the border, so also monitoring for that. We've implemented a asset management system. So we have an inventory of our public trees. We are currently collecting an inventory of our public woodlands, which provides us those management tools to have a better understanding of what it is that we're trying to manage. I think that's probably it. We can go on to the next slide. And then the future piece. So what we're currently working on, we're planning to work on. So with one of the actions within the strategy was to present a State of the Forest report. We will be bringing our first State of the Forest report to Council in 2025. We are hoping, it's currently scheduled for Q4. I can't imagine it's going to take us that long. I probably projected early Q3, if not late Q2. And that's going to provide at a whole high level where we're at with all of the actions, where the current tree canopy is at, the changes since the last time that we monitored it, and what we'll be putting forward is the recommendation to provide that on a 5-year basis. Trees don't move overly quick, so to put that forward every year, I think you wouldn't see a lot of change in the progress. You wouldn't see a lot of change in the urban forest. So we're suggesting a 5-year cycle. So 2025 would be the first one, and then you'll see us again in 2030. Something that we will begin. We've started working on the terms of reference. We haven't completed that, but the next piece is the tree planting strategy and providing that with an equity lens. So one of my project managers will be pushing forward with a citywide tree planting strategy. So to provide where we're currently at, how much available land we have, with that available land down to a neighborhood level. Where can we get those neighborhoods to by planting, X number of trees? So that will be a strategy that we'll be working through in 2025. Another big one that I wanted to highlight is the invasive species management strategy. So I noted some of the threats that we're currently monitoring for. What we don't have is a strategy that outlines what are the top threats, what should we be monitoring for, what are the action plans to deal with these sorts of threats. So this strategy is going to provide a little bit more direction for my group to be monitoring and to provide, I guess, boots on the ground type actions, as well as identify the resources to have a fulsome strategy, a fulsome control plan for any of these items that are coming into the city. A small one, If Trees Could Talk pilot, is going to be something that you'll see in 2025. This is the use of technology to actually put a voice to trees. I think it's going to be a really interesting engagement piece. So something a little bit more fun, a little less serious, hopefully gets people inspired to engage with the social media and start to think about the whimsical side of trees and in the urban environment. We've also got the private tree bylaw. So we currently have private tree bylaws within the city of Hamilton, but we do not have a citywide private tree bylaw. So we currently have a consultant working with our team and the Planning and Economic Development Group, as well as other groups within the city, to review the current bylaws and to come back with an amalgamated bylaw. And we'll be providing that by the end of 2025 into early 2026. And with that project also, we've got the updated tree protection guidelines. So that's the development guidelines for tree protection, compensation, replacement values for private developments. That's good. So we can go to the next slide.
Working on it, Robin. Thank you for your patience.
That's okay. And this is the last slide. So I wanted to provide a little bit of resources because I'm pretty excited about this. We've had staff completing a web page update for all of our trees and garden web pages. So, you know, I'll call them our forestry web pages. We've got a really great City of Hamilton website. And forestry didn't have the greatest web pages. We didn't have great links for people to go to. And if you're going to try and push information out, I don't think that we were doing an amazing job at it. So what we've done is we've gone through all of our program and service web pages, and we've actually updated them quite a bit. So we've got some new web pages that you wouldn't have seen before. So doing work near a tree. And tree ownership and responsibilities. The tree ownership and responsibilities is probably the one I'm most excited about. Forestry operations on the regular gets calls about whether this is or is not a public tree. So there will be an interactive web map showing all of the public trees versus the non-public trees wouldn't be mapped. So, you know, if you have a tree in your front yard, you think it's a city tree, there will be a web application actually go on and say, yes, so it is a city tree. So we're really excited to provide that, you know, to the community as a resource. The other one I'm excited about is doing work near a tree. So as you know, we have a public tree bylaw where if you want to apply for a public tree permit to either have the tree removed, or you want to do work near the tree and you need to have some, you need to preserve the roots or whatever. We've now got the ability to apply for a permit online. So that's another great resource. And then a couple of the other ones are just updates to the community tree planting program, the tree giveaway program, the street tree planting program, and our tree health, our web pages that we've updated. We've improved the information, we've improved the usability. And then the top piece that I've got there is just the UFS webpage. It was also updated. It was a little bit out of date. So the technical report is there, and the all of the engagement pieces, the council reports are all there. So I encourage you to take a look. And that's it for me. I think we have time for questions though.
Thank you so much, Robin. So I will open the floor to questions from any members of the committee. As I said in the chat, if you're online, just use the raise hand feature and I'll start a speakers list. Does anyone want to start things off? I'll start off with Gabby and then we'll move on from there. So Gabby, please.
Thanks so much, Robin. Really great to see all this. I was just curious getting a little bit more information on that equity lens and how Hamilton's thinking of applying it. I know, certainly I know that traditionally many urban forestry strategies have mapped things out at the ward level and looked at that ward level. I'm really glad to see that you're looking at it the neighborhood level to bring it down to a little bit understanding the inequities in tree canopy across the neighborhood level. I was just curious how you're thinking of approaching the kind of the state of the tree canopy and the urban forest in different neighborhoods, the opportunities for planting and capacity within the urban form, and then the barriers that different urban forms are likely to experience, and how you might be able to address that. And then, is there going to be a prioritization exercise of trying to figure out, with the limited resources, how to prioritize underserved neighborhoods? Is that the thinking on how Hamilton is approaching it, or is there a different kind of approach that you're thinking of?
So there's certainly a lot of levels there. There's a lot to your question, so I'm going to try and parse my way through it. The strategy is, as a whole, it'll be a tree planting strategy to ensure that as a city we meet the 40% by 2050. So there's a lot of different ways that we're going to have to get there, whether we're preserving what we have, improving what we have, and building upon what we have. The equity lens, I agree with you. I think the neighborhood level is absolutely necessary. We're lucky to be a little bit behind some of the other cities that have already learned some lessons. So we are getting to this as a first step versus, some of these other cities are, on their second update to an urban forest strategy, doing a 10-year or 5-year update. And these are lessons that we've learned, that at a ward level, it is very difficult to see the needle change, and it's very difficult to action something, especially if we're going to talk about, ward the size of Ward 9, for example, or something like that, or Ward 10. So the neighborhood level is an absolute must. It will just be within the urban area. Again, this is the urban forest strategy. It's not going to be a neighborhood level in the rural areas. And what we've done so far in terms of equity is we have at a high level the determination that there will be a prioritization, but I don't have the information yet as to how we will roll that out. But absolutely, it will be looking at what we have in each neighborhood, what we have within those wards, and then prioritizing them based on the resources and the timeline of 2050. So there's a lot to parse out as to how we look at doing that. But as a whole, in the background of all of these decisions and these actions and these strategies, we're going to try and connect them back to equity within the city, because I think that's really what we heard through the urban forest strategy, is that we need to have a resilient city, but we need to have it equitable. I'm hoping I answered most of your question. I know there was a lot there.
Yeah, and I think certainly I know that probably the working groups on the climate justice and community engagement and natural, that they'll definitely want to get a little bit more ongoing information on how the equity lens is being developed and learnings on the application of it.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, our group is a group of foresters, so we have those sorts of backgrounds. So a lot of it is reaching out to those that have the knowledge, the experience, the ability to make those determinations and assist us in making sure that we're going in the right directions. Part of reaching out and utilizing a consultant is to ensure that we have that diverse background when we develop this strategy. So, I'm really good with trees, but I'm not, amazing at looking at all of the different facets of an equity lens, right? So I think that's really why we've chosen to go that way versus developing it in-house, solely in-house.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gabby. Next up will be Jeff and then Shelley.
Hey, this was great. Thanks. So I've got a few points, and I'm going to try to make them more as comments, suggestions, and then if there's something that pops out to you that you want to respond to, great. If not, just take them for what they are. I'm most familiar with the parks in the North End, so when I'm going around Bayfront Park, it's great, but what it strikes me as the balance between open space and trees, there's definitely sort of room for more trees. And I imagine there's plans to put more trees, but I'm just hoping that there can be a look at maybe sort of densification in some of those areas, because, you know, there's certainly lots of places for people to do what they need to do, but especially in some of the areas like that or Pier 4 Park, I would say sort of respectfully, there is room. Also looking at something like, again, where you have the cherry blossoms, the sakuras that have been there near Hutch's, I guess, for quite some time, there's only like 10 or 12 of them. I'm just wondering if there's a thought of expanding something like that, because it's a tourist draw, but it's kind of limited in terms of there being so few and some of them not being in great health. And a way to maybe increase the canopy and increase people's interest in and connection to it is, I remember seeing there was some sort of adopt a tree or donate a tree. You know, if you had a relative that passed away or something like that, you could do that. And we were looking into that because we had a few relatives that passed away, and I think there'd be people who would be interested in that. If someone does that, then by virtue of that, they have more of a connection to that tree and that green space because they connect it to their relative. And I think that would be a great idea if you could look to do that in places, especially those parks like Bayfront Park, the ones that are really visited, and then people feel that more of a connection. And just my last plug is, if more fruit-bearing and flowering trees could be planted just to, you know, spice things up a little bit and provide something that could also be a food source and be something that people can sort of interact with in a different way, that'd be amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to hit on, I think, all 3 points. I'll start with the middle one, the cherry blossoms. I appreciate the idea, and absolutely we'll take it back. We do have a commemorative tree program. It is not, it's supported by forestry, but not led by forestry, but I can take that note to our business programs group and pass on the idea. I think it is a good one. The first piece, part of, and I didn't mention it, but one of the actions that we completed was the completion of the design and preservation manual. And the design and preservation manual, which was first done in 2022 and absolutely finalized finally in December 2024, provides developers and in-house groups the guidelines to install, design trees. So whether it's soil cells or whether it's soft surface trees, provides all of those things. Within it, we put in the target of 40% for all park redevelopments. So all new parks and all park redevelopment projects now have, aside from sports parks, because it's a little bit of a different, beast, now have the ask of designing the park with a 40% tree canopy. So when they're actually looking at those site plans, they're plotting those out to meet a 40% tree canopy, and we're aiming for it at about 80% maturity. So it does take obviously a long time to get there, but that is in the initial planning stages. So places like Bayfront, you know, obviously weren't planned like that in the beginning. But if a new park is being developed, this guideline is directing those project managers to do that. And the last piece, the fruit-bearing and food-bearing, one of the actions in the UFS council report, so not one of the 26 actions in the actual strategy, but within the council report, was implementing more food-bearing and fruit-bearing trees. It's going to be tough, but we are committed to it. We just have to really figure out what is the best way to, like you said, kind of spice it up while ensuring that we're not developing operational issues and health and safety issues, which can sometimes be an issue. So we are trying to work on it, and I think it's going to be something that you'll see in 2025. You might see a few here and there, and we really have to kind of figure out what is the best way to do this, because fruit-bearing trees and food-bearing trees require much more maintenance than a maple tree or an oak tree. So we'll we'll continue to work our way through that one.
Jeff, did you have any follow-up with that? Okay, great. We'll go on to Shelley.
My question, by the way, thank you for that, Robin. That was really helpful. My question too is around the equity lens, and I guess my concern is that people's health is so closely related to who they are and where they live. And my hope is that when you talk about an equity lens, you're going to be looking at addressing neighborhoods that are very underserved by trees, Indigenous community neighborhoods, racialized communities, low-income communities. Because I guess my worry is that we could meet our urban strategy for planting trees and be very happy and applaud ourselves, but we may still miss out on neighborhoods that really need it in the end. And I hope we can look at all kinds of different ways of making those communities greener, tiny little gardens on corners and so on in every way possible. So that's sort of what I'm, without, you're the expert on the trees and where to plant them and the types, but I really want to see, I guess, those specific neighborhoods addressed first and foremost. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure that I can answer the question, but I can try and address the concern. A lot of these neighborhoods, I think, are missing trees for many, many different reasons, and some of them are available space. But available soil space is usually the indicator. So one action that we are taking on, and I know that I think I can see Linda there. I think that Linda's group is also doing this as well. And I know that Juliana's on the call, is the idea of depaving. And I think that this is a piece that was missing in forestry for sure. We weren't doing it. I don't think 20 years ago, if you asked me what I was going to be doing as an arborist, I would have been looking at removing asphalt and planting trees. I don't think that I assumed that it was going to be something I was ever going to have to do. I think it is going to play a part in this equity lens, because it is not as simple as going into neighborhoods which were affected by Emerald Ash Borer, for example, where they were treed streets, now they're not treed streets, and you're just planting trees. I think we have to be creative, and I think some of the creativity is going to come from depaving. I also think some of the creativity is going to be compromising and not getting canopy in every single area, but trying to get greenery. And I think a lawn, I think a small garden, I think, it's not my favorite thing in the world, but a planter is better than nothing. And I think that we need to have that all of the different tools in the toolbox. But obviously at the one end is hopefully we can make space for trees. I think we need to design them into our cities in a better fashion. And I think our green building standards and our complete streets guidelines provide that direction. And the equity lens will provide us some resources to really dig into, initiatives like depaving, which I think we're going to have to do.
Any follow-up, Shelley? Okay, great. So we'll move on to Juliana.
Thank you, and thanks, Robin. So my question is that right now with the climate change action strategy, we currently really only have one nature-based solution target, one measurable thing that we're working toward, the planting of 50,000 trees each year across the municipality. And so because of that one goal, all of this wonderful urban forest strategy work kind of gets boiled down into that, and then it becomes really quite critical. If those trees are being planted, where they're being planted, how decisions are being made about where they're planted, and then also if they're surviving and sticking around, and if we're able to count on those 50,000 trees contributing to our climate change goals moving forward. So my question was, and this is sort of what the nature-based solution group, when we met, we were chatting, was, do we really, can you explain now if we have a really clear roadmap and the resources and the operational strategy, I guess, in how we're going to accomplish that target? Do we have that yet? And if so, yeah, I mean, it sounds like what I'm hearing is that the tree planting strategy with the equity lens and then the programs and planting methods that will follow are still coming from that. So if you could just clarify, do we have that operational plan yet, or is it still lots of data needs to be collected and things we're working on?
So because we didn't want to waste time, the initial reaction with the implementation of the urban forest strategy was an immediate increase of our internal tree planting efforts. So on average, we were planting about 12,000 trees per year. We immediately upped that to 20,000 trees starting in 2024. That was the target. That will continue to be the target until one of these strategies directs us in a way that we have a better defined need and what types of resources are going to have to go along with that. So for the 50,000 trees, forestry is committed to this. Forestry section is committed to planting 20,000, and the community is on the hook for the other 30,000, which seems off, I guess. But if you think about, we've got conservation groups, we have, environmental groups, we have landscapers, we have all of these other groups to plant the other 30,000. So that was an immediate action. The strategies that I've outlined, so the invasive species management strategy and the tree planting strategy with the equity lens, are going to drive the other actions that are going to be required. Because to your point, Juliana, I absolutely agree that we have one metric and it is planting trees. It will not solve this issue. It's putting 50,000 trees in the ground every year until 2045 or whatever number we're going to get to is not going to get us to that number. The preservation and the increase in health is just as important as planting those trees. So having our asset management plan updated on an annual basis, understanding where our current inventory is at, completing the monitoring for invasive pests, increasing our oversight on the tree protection guidelines to ensure that the private developments are preserving trees where they can, if not compensating and increasing green space, the green building standards, the complete streets. All of these strategies are ensuring that as we're designing and going through large capital projects, we have that we have in the background the fact that the green areas within those developments has to be planned for. We can't go back into these areas and continue to depave. It's a backwards way of looking at it. So I would love to say that we have it. We don't. We are working on it, and these strategies are going to identify where we're lacking and what resources we're lacking. And I don't want that to come off as, we're going to come back to council and say we need X, Y, and Z. I think we really need to be creative about it. So part of increasing from 12,000 to 20,000 trees each year, we didn't ask for anything additional aside from those 2 FTEs to get going on the UFS strategy action items. We did that by reducing the size of trees that we were planting different types of trees, really looking at our approved species list and looking at the cost per tree. So a maple tree costs X, an oak tree costs Y. We really started to look at those sorts of things so that we were actually planning to ensure we were utilizing current resources as best as possible so that we're not consistently coming back and saying, well, now I need to plant 30,000 trees, so we need even more money. We're really trying to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible.
Julianne, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I did. If just a quick one. So Robin, just to clarify then, the 20,000 trees that the city is committed to planting, those would be on public property. And then would the assumption be that the 30,000 trees that are contributed from other, community partners and institutions, et cetera, are all private property then, not happening on city property?
Yes, that'd be correct.
Okay.
Linda Lukasik, Manager of the Office for Climate Change Initiatives.
Thank you, through the chair. Just also to clarify on that, because our team in the Office of Climate Change Initiatives has taken on that task of tracking the 30,000. And I mean, I can tell you from the count that we did for 2023, a good portion of those additional trees were being planted on Conservation Authority land. So I mean, I would categorize those as public. I think that's a fair categorization. So just so you're aware, I mean, there is a lot of that kind of planting happening. And maybe just a quick comment as well, just on Juliana, on your acknowledgement of the 20,000 tree commitment is really like probably one of the key greening initiatives that we see in our mitigation plan. We think we also need to acknowledge there are lots of elements in the adaptation plan that's part of Hamilton's climate action strategy, where we'll see additional tree planting and greening. So those two plans are like, they work together, I think, in moving us along with some of the other forms of greening that Robin is speaking to, some of which I'm fully expecting, like the stormwater fee rebated incentive programs, for instance. I'm pretty certain we'll see some trees, being planted as a result of those initiatives. Private land, but still adding to the effort overall.
Great. Moving on. Sue Heenan, you had a question.
Hi, Robin. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could help clarify where forestry and planning work together on the urban forestry strategy. It's hard to sometimes figure out where things go wrong between the different departments when it comes to like the watering, the care for the trees, all of that, because I mean, we can plant 50,000 trees, but if we're not caring for them, then it's just green wasting. So I was hoping for some clarity on how the departments work together on this strategy.
I'll try to keep it quick. It's not easy to define where all of our operational sides versus the strategic sides and all of that happen. Forestry as a whole, our operational group plants all public trees, waters all public trees, mulches all public trees, and maintains all public trees. We also oversee the tree permitting process for public trees. We don't oversee the private side of the tree permitting. So if there's permits for woodlands or private trees, that's municipal law enforcement. The planning side of it oversees the private development. So if you were to, let's say, put in a subdivision in an area, the public trees that are planted and overseen by forestry. The private trees would be done by the developer, and that would be in consultation with the planning group. So that's kind of the easiest way to say it. So to your point, the green wasting, if there are public trees not being cared for after they're planted, that is our forestry operations group.
Any follow-up, Sue?
Yeah, I do. So, okay, let me put it this way then. I don't think I was very clear. So say a tree organization is helping to plant a number of trees, and they need access to those trees to I'm not talking about in the Conservation Authority area, but they need access to those trees to care for them, water them. There seem to be some issues in getting to those trees. I guess there's something to do with planning, and it makes it a bit challenging to actually care for the trees that are planted.
So the trees are planted on public lands, and there's a stewardship issue. Is that kind of what you're trying to get at?
Yeah.
So if they're planted on public lands outside of the stormwater ponds, it would be the operations group, so our forestry group, who would oversee, I guess, permissions to access those lands, assistance with, moving mulch into the area, assistance with providing water. That would be the forestry group. The planning group, in terms of those sorts of things, I don't know that they connect at all to stewardship of new plantings. They're really about the preservation of our current heritage systems. Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm next on the speakers list, so I'll just quickly ask Gabby to take the chair. So just really quickly, Robin, thank you so much. You've gone into details of how the urban forest strategy overlaps with a variety of other city initiatives and departments, and I really appreciate that. I'm just, for my own curiosity, could you just provide a little bit more detail on the overlaps between the Biodiversity Action Plan and the urban forest strategy? Thank you.
This is a difficult one to keep straight in my head because they overlap quite a bit. The beauty of the Biodiversity Action Plan, in my opinion, is that it is direct in its actions. It is very simple to see what actions are supposed to come out of it, whereas the urban forest strategy is a much higher level, and I think that's where we see some of the intersects. So where they overlap is, obviously, we need to have a diverse species of trees within our urban forest. So the increasing of diversity, the oversight, monitoring, and control of invasives within our urban forest, I think is another area that they overlap. So the Biodiversity Action Plan is really focused on increasing diversity and preserving that diversity. Whereas if we are not monitoring and controlling invasives or soon to be or threatening type species within our urban forest, I think that we are, I don't even know what the analogy would be, or we're never going to make it is probably the easiest way to say it. So I think those are probably where you see the biggest overlap. And we could get into, a million other overlaps, but I think that's probably the simplest way of saying it. The only additional one that I really see is the understanding of our inventories. So, and the urban forest strategy really directed us to have an inventory of our urban forest. So that's our urban woodlands and our public trees. The Biodiversity Action Plan also speaks to ensuring we have oversight of our assets, of our green assets. So I think there's a little bit of overlap there as well. It goes further because it also speaks about our grasslands and our watershed areas, but there's a connection between those two. I think if I were to sit with the two action plans, I could probably draw a million more connections, but on the spot, I think those are probably the big ones.
No, thank you so much, Robin. I'll take the chair back from you, Gabby. And then for our final question, I'll hand it back to you, Gabby, to ask that question.
Thanks. I was just curious how far along in the thinking is the Talk to Me Tree initiative, which I think is great because I love that creativity of kind of engaging, giving opportunities for citizens and residents to engage with their tree and learn a little bit about trees and their value to the ecosystem and how the stresses on trees, in particular in the urban areas. I just think it's like huge opportunities in that area. And I think that it's a great gateway action for engaging residents in not just trees and urban forests, but also on climate change, resilience, drought, a whole bunch of issues. So huge opportunities. And I really want to commend for that bringing that creative approach into engaging residents with the trees. So I was just curious, and then what the longer term opportunities are for working groups to kind of work with the urban forestry team for opportunities to like adopt a street tree programs, those type of more creative and create community engagement, adopt a street tree programs, or any of that kind of stuff.
So the it was originally called tree tweeting, but obviously we can't call it tweeting anymore because that's not going to work. So the project is in its infancy. We just through this year's budget process, we've now received the approval to proceed. So that's literally, you know, we're just talking days at this point. Where the project is going to go at a very high level is we're going to have 2 trees, one, you know, the perfect spot for a tree, and one, the not so perfect spot for a tree. And the, I guess, personality behind these 2 trees is what's going to come out to the public. So when you're having those dry, long, hot days, you're going to see 2 separate types of conversations coming out through these trees. How that's going to look is you know, really quick, and hopefully engaging, hopefully a little bit childish is kind of what we're looking for, is because I don't want it to be, you know, we're not looking for a scientific conversation here. We're looking for, you know, my roots are dry, that, you know, something whimsical. So that's where it's at its infancy, is really about choosing a tree where we know that this is the best spot. So, you know, just off the top of my head, you know, a big, beautiful front yard in Ancaster where it's got all the room in the world and it's a 300-year-old oak tree, versus, you know, one of those poor little trees we have at City Hall that are just surrounded by concrete. So something like that, where you're going to really see those differences. And then having those as a personality that's going to engage with the community. That's where it's at its whole. It will collect data points. So it's going to collect moisture. It's going to collect all of these different data points. And that information can then be shared. We're hoping that there are initiatives that come out of it. We're willing to engage with the community, you know, McMaster, City Labs, these types of groups, to see where those data points can be used and what type of information can be provided. It may speak to our operational standards for things like watering and mulching, that sort of thing. It may spark us to implement some watering during drought areas. So that's what we're hoping to gather. And then to your last point, I hope that I have this reputation. I am happy to speak to the community. I'm happy to hear the ideas, and I'm always happy to see what we can do better. So all of those different programs, as we work through these strategies, one of them being the planting strategy, I hope that the actions that come out of it are things like what you're talking about, where we utilize the community to water, to monitor, to mulch, all of these sorts of things. It's really about, as a whole, identifying what we need to do and what are the types of programs that we need to implement to get there. I wish we were further along, but that's where we're at now.
Perfect. Thank you.
So that was the last question. On behalf of the committee, thank you so much, Robin, for joining with us this evening and answering our questions. And I'm sure members will certainly be following up with you. We need to move along in the agenda to item 7.2, the Green Building Standards update from staff, and that will be presented by Mallory Smith, Planner of Planning Economic Development. And I'll just give Mallory a little bit more time to get ready. As I point out, and just thank the members of the committee who have joined us during the last presentation. So I see you, Councillor Kretsch, Mary Ellen, Leonard, and Jesse. Thank you for joining with us. Mallory, I see your camera's on. Do you have a presentation to share with us, or any slides like that, Mallory?
Yeah, thanks. We have Anthony Paleshi here from WSP, and he'll be giving the presentation portion.
Okay, so so that's the Anthony Paleshi who needs to have the ability to share. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Beatrice is just setting that up right now.
I would say actually the reason I was having some troubles connecting earlier, I kind of bounced in and out, and it happened to me again. It seems that WebEx is crashing on my computer, so I'm now just on my phone talking to you. I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to try and restart it, but maybe if instead, I don't know if Mallory, I sent you the presentation. I'm not sure if you saw that, or
Yeah.
I can also
can
share as well.
Okay, Mallory can share
Whatever's
then.
easiest.
Okay.
yeah, that leaves, yeah. I feel like, Haley, that leaves you free to take notes, so you don't have to like think about anything, if that makes sense. So
Fair. Yeah.
okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, sorry about that. Usually it's fine. I'm not sure what's wrong. My apologies for the issues.
Technical difficulties, it's not a problem. So Mallory, you should have the ability to share once you have that presentation ready on your end. There we go. We can all see it.
Great.
Thank you so much. Mallory and the rest of your team, please take it away.
Awesome. Oh, okay, thanks. So I'm Anthony Paleschi. I'm from WSP. We've been working with Mallory and Emily, and in theory, a few others, like based on our presentation or our meeting the other day. Members of this CCAC were at the meeting, and I'm going to kind of go over what we've done so far in the work, just at a high level, and hopefully get to. I'll just preface this by saying there's probably more to be discussed, and I guess we'll see based on what you think from the presentation today, if there is more talk there and more discussion that's needed after it. Because I know that there's 2 other agenda items that need to come after this, so I guess we'll have to make some decisions depending on how long we want to talk about it. But functionally, what I'm going to do is just go over the work that we've done to date in partnership with the Hamilton team. I'll highlight some considerations that have come from the discussion that we had just recently with a broader group, and then I'll sort of give you some next steps of where we're hoping to go next. So that's the plan for I'll try and be quick and get to the meat so that it's we can get to questions quickly. So we just as a quick summary, I'm sure most people are up to speed on what's been happening, but the WSP team has been supporting city staff to do essentially additional engagement directed by council in response to the CCAC's follow-up essentially, or deposition or information and recommendations brought to council about the green building standards, specifically the energy operational energy requirements. And so we did some research and reviewed their recommendations. We actually spoke with the City of Toronto, and then we recently had this engagement session. So to bring the discussion to a broader group, including members of the CCAC. So you can see here who was at that discussion. So several members of the CCAC, so staff team that is involved, climate action committee, technical governance folks, working group folks. The West End Home Builders had a couple folks there. The HCE, Hamilton Community Energy, had a couple folks there. Hamilton Industrial Environmental Association, members of the Bay Area Climate Change Council, and then our team. So, and what we did was it's called I'm not sure the exact. I can't remember the exact term for it, but basically we take. I did a quick introduction, or not quick, but reasonably lengthy introduction into the sort of history of how the requirements for energy have been developed through the Green Building Standard, and then essentially presented the CCAC's recommendation as the expected starting point for revisions to the standard. So that's essentially how we present it. It's like, okay, the CCAC has recommended this. There's lots of reasons why that makes sense, and I'll reiterate that in a minute because I think that's an important piece of the discussion. And then we posed some, we summarized what were challenges we've seen and heard in our research, some of the deposed challenges, and then and then presented some of the recommendations that the CCAC made as almost like discussion questions and items. And we engaged in the discussion on these 3 topics. So based on the recommendations for requirements for energy, how can those requirements be potentially made simpler or more flexible in offering alternative pathways to compliance? Are there ways of funding to reduce the cost of development and other costs associated with compliance? And then supporting, potentially the 3rd topic was supporting the value proposition more broadly. The reason that these were the 3 topics was because a lot of the challenges, I guess you would say, that we have identified to taking an accelerated approach, which is essentially what's recommended by the CCAC relative to what was in place in the previous round of the GBS development for these requirements, is that the challenges seem to be, a lot to do with financial implications and challenges. And so that, that sort of drove a lot of the discussion. But, I think that we had some pretty good discussion about these three topics. And so, yeah, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, I'll kind of walk through a little bit. So the recommendations and what was presented, and this is sort of representative of what was recommended for Part 3 larger buildings or by the CCAC, and is very much in alignment with what is recommended in the City of Toronto's expected Toronto Green Standard version 5, as well as what's recommended in other municipalities that use a similar approach, is these three metrics: GHGI, total greenhouse gas intensity, total energy use intensity, and thermal energy demand intensity, setting targets, clear ones for 2026 when the standard will come out, and for 2028. These targets are in alignment with what the City of Toronto, for example, is expected to go with in version 5 of the standard, or more or less in alignment of that, which is due to be released soon. They kind of address what I would describe as the breadth of climate action goals, so not just focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, but also energy resilience problem or challenges, as well as energy cost implications associated with the fact that fuel switching is the main driver for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, mean that costs could go up. So we should think about energy use and thermal energy demand to help keep those costs from not going up too quickly for folks, or going down even. And so that's that's why we have these three metrics, and recognizing this, CCAC saw that and recommended that approach. They offer performance-based approach, which is great, and that actually typically offers a lot of flexibility for developers. Now, the closer you get to challenging to implement targets, the more that flexibility seems constrained. And so that is actually some of the potential discussion and what relates to the cost challenges. And then arguably, like, one of the main reasons I think that was brought forward is like, we want a consistent set of metrics across building types, but making sure that those, they're customized to different building types, so that if one, archetype of building needs more flexibility in certain targets, that makes sense. And again, this whole alignment with Toronto and other jurisdictions is important. So if you go to the next slide, there's also recommendations for Part 9 buildings, or called low-rise residential. Again, similar idea, having the three metrics aligning with that breadth of goals, performance-based, and then consistent set of metrics. So now we're making sure that all buildings are sort of held to the same standards. And then there is a specific recommendation for Part 9 buildings to look at a prescriptive path, which we had sort of pitched as being something that was part of the discussion, although it was expressly recommended by the CCAC to have some kind of fuel switching prescriptive path. And that was one of the main things that we talked about in the discussions, three discussions we had. So if you go to the next slide, these are the boards that kind of we circulated around. So we're still summarizing a lot of these, this discussion. So we haven't finished our summary, and our work isn't done yet to sort of go over it all and understand implications. But functionally, we had these boards that circulated around to the groups that were there. We identified some things we thought were important to talk about within each of the three topic areas. Now, this one is actually the third topic. So reducing the cost the second topic, reducing the cost of development. So you can see we talked about some development charge reduction opportunities. Those aren't necessarily easy for the city to do, for example, but we can explore deferrals, which is one of the opportunities that's being looked at. Other opportunities through CIPs, parkland dedications, and fees. So looking at ways to reduce those development charges are being explored. You can see comments are, developers are eager to see incentives related to faster, simpler approval process and clear guidance on requirements. So that was one of the sort of like, what is it that we need? Okay, great. The prescriptive pathway idea actually aligns with making things more cost effective, and that was echoed by lots of people there. Overlapping submissions with green building standards and code submissions was identified as a potential path, but might be difficult because of the relationship between the two clear phases of work. Also, we heard from the City of Toronto that when we chatted with them that they're a bit nervous to maybe overlap the two things in part because of some of the restrictions that exist on how quickly things need to turn around for the submission of planning approval. So there is something to be explored there, but it seems like it might be a bit sticky to overlap those things. And then some things about upskilling staff to review and approve green building standards were identified. So that's going to be needed. Interest in having resource hub within the city that can direct others towards known incentives was one thing that was discussed for sure. So, but essentially, we talked about that topic at length. If you go to the next slide, the second topic that we dove into was about supporting this value, or I guess it's the third technically in the order I showed before, developing the value proposition for decarbonized new construction. And I think it was interesting. So we were trying to include what we would describe as like more innovative discussion, things that aren't in a standard or, in people's minds when they're at that stage of submitting for their development application for a new building, which the first two topics addressed. The topic was like, okay, well, what are some ways that we can help developers that are outside of the planning process maybe? So, for example, supporting a labeling program, indicating that potentially, there's a plan for the city to have existing building requirements in the future and starting to line up for those. And then, for example, a report requiring support for commissioning, air tightness testing, and other things that happen outside of the planning process and the code submission process. So you can see some of the discussion that happened there. What's the value proposition was discussed, like what is it that is really beneficial to developers and owners? How do we connect those things? People care about climate action, but also there's this bottom line part to assessing it, and those are sometimes difficult to overlap. There was this idea that the district energy could provide economies of scale, potentially offer something that is both cost effective and low carbon, and that the fact that it's city owned helps with that. So there was a strong argument from those who were there from the district energy team to make that case. There was discussions about labeling and certification. They can be onerous, maybe not related to building performance, and labeling can be, time consuming. But, at the same time, we want to see the solutions that come forward achieve real performance, and that the difference between what's designed and how it performs is important to fill that gap. So maybe not labeling, but at least a process by which that's motivated, and then discussions about testing. When is it required? What are the expectations? So, okay, so if you go to the last slide, probably the one that's most relevant is right now, because it's what's most urgent, is what should the requirements of the standard be? Should they change, from what is recommended by the CCAC? This idea of starting from what was recommended and asking do we need any changes? So we talked about what is the right way to offer flexibility on what we identified as expensive metrics to achieve. The TEDI and EUI metrics are more expensive to achieve within the building stock. GHGI is actually more straightforward to achieve. So, that was important research we did. So we talked a little bit about that. It was identified that, most people agreed if we want to focus on GHGI, let's do that. Potentially that's okay to do and offer flexibility in the other metrics, or perhaps have a prescriptive path that allowed for that, for a focus on GHGI reduction or decarbonization of the heating systems in buildings. So the one thing, though, that was brought up was that, builders do want multiple different pathways in order to achieve that. Maybe not just a fuel switch only requirement potentially. Maybe there are other ways of doing that. And also that there will be these, there will be within, future versions of the energy requirements, the NECB, there will be prescriptive paths that may be beneficial and that will allow for, say, a more robust set of requirements. So, sorry, a more robust set of pathways, prescriptive pathways that could be followed. So, so we talked a little about that. Everyone sort of gave some contributions, and I think if you go to the next slide, this is sort of summarizing where are we going to go from here. So we've taken in all the results of the discussion, and we did some research. As I mentioned, we spoke to the City of Toronto. We're also talking to the City of Caledon, asking for some feedback from them. because that was one of the standards that the CCAC referenced as being a useful source, and they had pulled some of the recommendations from the City of Caledon's approach. So we're engaging with them, and we're finishing some other due diligence work in reviewing what's available from Toronto and others. Essentially, what we can say is, like, it seems like right now that the CCAC's recommendation for GHGI targets, especially for 2026 and even for 2028, so that future target, makes sense and should be emphasized, and that I think there's some questions that we need to talk about, and potentially you'll see a recommendation from us on how to address emission factors as it relates to setting those targets. So, like, what approach should be used to set the emission factors. But it's clear that those targets seem achievable, that it's not that expensive, that it should be promoted as something that is within the standard that goes beyond what had been previously recommended. So that seems pretty clear. It does seem pretty clear that a DAS connection equivalency path makes sense, as long as the DAS providers, whether it be Hamilton, Community Energy or others, they can show compliance with the targets that have been developed, especially for the GHGI, and in a science-based way. That's kind of the way we'll frame our recommendation or observation. And it was sort of brought up that even by the Hamilton Community Energy folks themselves, that council can direct them to do that, like to achieve and to develop a plan that would align with those requirements. And so I think that is maybe a next step that relates to that. But so that seemed fairly clear from the discussion, that as long as it's clear that the district energy would advance alongside the targets that have been set, and that it would be a potentially useful path for people. And that it's pretty clear that advanced supports as soon as possible are needed. So development charge, deferment, and other bonusing that's been talked about should, obviously keep going, and those should be discussions as part of the implementation. And that potentially the focus on support to residential subsector and smaller developers is something we've noticed from our previous work, and that might be something that we will recommend or suggest be considered for how that support is developed. Okay, and then the next slide, it's a little sort of what is controversial still, or in quotes, like what needs some further thinking and discussion, and we don't think is a clear answer in the CCAC recommendations that probably need to be thought a little bit more about or discussed. So setting the TEDI and TUR targets to match the Toronto, like that, the 100 and the 30, and setting future targets, which are quite challenging to achieve, and which may have significant increases in cost relative to the current market in order to achieve, may be difficult. So we kind of understood that. However, it's not clear whether there should be just relaxation of those targets, or only relaxation when a tier 2 performance is achieved in GHGI. So I think that there's two ways of thinking about that probably should be discussed. And then the question beyond the residential sector, especially, should these targets be required of other building types? Is there a motivation for TEDI and TUI targets outside of the residential sector? I think is something to be discussed in more detail. And then on the side of the prescriptive requirements and what to pursue, having a partial fuel switch requirement, as they do in Caledon, might be a good idea and seems clear and could align with what's recommended in Caledon. So that's one path. The question is, should it only be for Part 9 buildings that this prescriptive path is offered for? There may be a fairness argument there, only offering a prescriptive path for Part 9 buildings, but not for Part 3. And the NECB, when it's released, will offer potentially a solution for both Part 3 and Part 9. However, neither set of the NECB 2025 has not been released yet, so there isn't something concrete to hold on to yet for both types of buildings. So that's some discussion that we will provide in terms of where to go next for the prescriptive path. And then the discussion of where should supports advance as soon as possible. Actually, if you go to the next slide, I'll just touch on a little bit of what we're going to talk about there. So I think our collected recommendation is that there seems to be two kinds of conversations that we're entering here. One that is about, that is in partnership with smaller census metropolitan area peers like Caledon, and then one that's with the bigger city peers like Toronto. There seems to be two ways of working together that make sense that, arguably it would be good to see the city advance on, working with the Caledon and other folks who will expect to see a lot more low-rise buildings, looking at best practice case studies for Part 9 buildings, prescriptive package, jointly developing those to allow for harmonization across different jurisdictions, and some joint training of code officials, et cetera, alignment with incentives for Part 9 buildings, and then similarly for the City of Toronto and others working on performance-based metrics and targets that are similar and line up and are different in different jurisdictions, maybe uploading, in quotes, some of the modeling rules and oversight and review work for energy models-based submissions for Part 3 buildings. And then again, aligning with incentives for that type of building, those group of buildings. So you can sort of see where we're headed with some of our recommendations and, high level, suggestions on where the standard should go, but there is a bit of gap between exactly what the CCAC recommended and where things should go next. So we are expecting to prepare our memo to the city staff. And actually, I'll pass it maybe back to Mallory and Emily if you guys want to talk about the next steps for the process. But our memo is due in draft form coming up in next week on March 7th. So.
Thanks, Anthony.
Great. Yeah, no problem.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry again about the audio quality if that's been bad. So my apologies.
No, we could hear you. Thanks, Anthony. So again, just want to say thank you to the CCAC for ongoing engagement thus far. We are expecting to bring a report back early this spring with the update to the standards recommended for the green building standards, and then another report also early this spring on implementation measures. And Anthony, I think we have more opportunity for CCAC to submit some more comments in the next week or so. So those can be forwarded to myself, but we do have some discussion. Anthony, I don't know if you had lead discussion questions or for taking questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific questions of others. Except it would be nice if, folks saw what if we can go back to the slides, those last two, if people have questions about it. But if anyone wants to comment on those gaps that we've identified and things that we're going to touch on, that's great. If there's not enough time, also happy to, have people review the memo, provide their written feedback to you. If we do need to have another chat or get together with folks, we can look at that for sure.
Thank you, Thank you, Mallory and Anthony. I have two questions for you right here. There might be a couple others, but first I'll be going to Jesse. Oh. Can we ask you to unmute, Jesse? From our end?
There we go. Am I back?
There we go.
Sorry about that. Did not like that unmute there. Thanks, Anthony. That was great. This hopefully should be a pretty simple question. I just wanted to clarify something you said. On the prescriptive versus performance-based, like when you reference prescriptive pathways, can you just elaborate on that a little bit? Because, I mean, when I hear that, it just reminds me of when we were working with some building designers and in their specifications, they were prescriptive rather than performance-based, and it led to a lot of issues with using new materials or more innovative materials because maybe you had some like specific content for a cement mix, for example, that you had to use rather than using a lower carbon mix. So yeah, that just, I wanted to flag that as I heard that. Just maybe I misunderstood what you were saying with prescriptive.
Yeah, and I wish I could talk to you guys for give a better primer. So some things are going quickly over it, but in the case of operational energy measures, there's actually a long-standing set of packages in the code, for example, which say like, oh, this set of 5 things, as long as you implement those, is equivalent to meeting the requirements of the standard. Those are often called prescriptive packages. So things like insulation in walls to this level, windows are triple glazed, roofing has this much insulation, and you have a partial heat pump within the heating system. So as long as you've checked all those boxes and you have to submit evidence in that you've done those things, then you don't have to show, for example, an energy model that your design meets the target, right? Those performance-based thresholds that are sort of the core of the targets. You don't have to meet those. You can just show that you did an equivalent set of measures. So that's usually what we mean when we say a prescriptive package or pathway.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
And then next up, we had a question from Sue.
Thank you, Anthony, Mallory, and Haley. My question is pretty quick and easy. I couldn't understand. I was having trouble reading some of the slides that were on the screen. I was trying to look at the ones that had the sticky notes, and you were mentioning something about an area where Toronto was nervous, and I didn't know. I couldn't really read what was on the slide, so and I missed what you had said. So I was curious if you could just please clarify that for me. Yeah, the white and the green on my screen is not great. So I don't know if it's written like plainly right there and I just can't see it.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm just like, I'm going to just disconnect now. I finally managed to get my computer to work, so I think it's much better audio this way, hopefully. I'm not sure what specific comment it was, but I can say what we've heard from Toronto, so that might be just the answer to your question. Obviously the city is in the process of developing TGS version 5, and they have done some preliminary assessments, which they shared with us. Some of it was in confidence, so I'm not sure to what extent that can be made public. But it's pretty clear that they and others have been worried about the costs associated with the next level of TEDI and TUI performance for a while. In my work that we've done to support developers, we've seen a 3 to 7% total incremental costs associated with meeting those next level of performance thresholds. And so I think that Toronto is seeing that as well now as they look at what it costs to do those to take those next steps. It's not consistent across all building types. And in fact, arguably what is really good news is that the fuel switch part, like doing that GHGI reduction by switching to a heat pump, which actually achieves a lot of energy use savings as well, that part isn't very expensive across the sector, most sectors. And so that's good evidence to say that, yes, we can go with those tighter GHGI targets, but it's the cost of, everyone seems a bit nervous about this, 3 to 7% cost increase associated with the improved enclosure and other energy efficiency requirements, especially to meet the TEDI targets. So I think that's what was meant by that. Yep.
And then over to Gabby for our last question.
Thanks so much for this update. It's really good to hear in terms of that, the well-received input from the development community with regards to giving them multiple pathways for compliance with the Green Development Standard, whether it be the GHGI or the TEDI and all that, kind of where it all lands with that option, as well as the prescriptive pathway with the mechanical system reliance to achieve your outcomes, and then the option to connect up to a district energy system. I think that's fantastic that we're giving a lot of options for how people could meet the requirements of the Green Development Standard, and that is well received from the development community. We've also seen that in many other municipalities that have been doing consultations to provide that options on multiple pathways for compliance. And I also wanted to I think one of the key areas as well is Hamilton does have the Hamilton Community Energy, the district energy system. They do have a commitment towards decarbonization in the same way the city of Hamilton has their decarbonization commitment. And I do think that while it is a fossil fuel system at present, their ability to decarbonize will be contingent on building the customer base for that thermal network. So I think that's a really good option to kind of bring into the overall mix. In addition, keeping that kind of commitment at the same time as Hamilton's moving that forward with Hamilton Community Energy to ensure that ongoing work. I know they're doing a lot of work on thermal mapping, and I think one of the things we are hearing from a lot of this discussions is that we don't want to throw all our eggs in the electrification basket. And with Hamilton having waste heat opportunities, that's a real viable option in the city of Hamilton if we invest in it and build the customer base to enable that to happen. So I just wanted to kind of, I really am glad that that all of those kind of those were well received by the development community, because I think that'll make it a lot easier a discussion in front of council to provide those key opportunities for compliance with the Green Development Standard and reduce the resistance that we tend to get from the development community moving these forwards, especially to the higher aggressive standards that we need to go towards. I did want to kind of highlight that I don't think we have an equity issue with regards to Part 9 and Part 3 buildings in terms of prescriptive options. There's a lot more economics associated with low carbon scenarios in the Part 3 than there is in terms of Part 9 on that front. So that option to give a prescriptive pathway in Part 9 versus not necessarily being able to offer that in Part 3, maybe right away, I don't think that's a huge equity issue. And it's because we're trying to give more options to the more difficult sector for this, which is the Part 9. Thanks.
Yeah, it's cool. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And maybe it isn't a problem, and maybe it is just recognizing that one builder community just prefers, and arguably it's not cheaper to use a prescriptive path. In some ways it's just easier, and so maybe that just makes sense for that community, and there isn't necessarily any conflict there. But yeah, I guess the thought behind that was when you're offering it, sometimes when you're offering something to one group of people, another group of people who also are struggling to meet their targets, there may be some concern associated with that. So I think it's just flagging that and making sure that if there is a desire for that path, that it could potentially be explored through the NECB 2025, which I think will probably be our suggestion. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I should say also too that a lot of times with if there's for Part 9 on that front, if we are advancing, actually I forgot my thought, so I'll just stop it. But I'm really glad to see this, and it's really great to see that the input from the CCAC was brought to the kind of larger stakeholder base, and that the input was brought together and then shared back with us. I really appreciate that kind of follow through on the circle.
Alrighty, thank you to Anthony, and thank you so much as well to Mallory. We're going to move on. Next up is 7.3. Oh, do we have a raised hand from someone?
Yeah.
From Emily.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to follow up before you move on. I'm Emily Coe. I'm the Acting Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. Mallory on my team is overseeing this additional consultation. So we just wanted to ensure that if you wanted another meeting after this, or if this is satisfactory. So, like what Anthony provided to you is being taken into consideration, and we'll be reporting back to you shortly. But if you want another meeting, it needs to be likely next week, because we're on a very, very condensed time frame right now, as we need to get this report back to council in April. So thoughts on that?
I'm seeing some interest both in the chat and in person for having another meeting, even if it does have to be very quick on the return for that. Councillor Wilson, I see you have raised your hand.
Yeah, not weighing in on the meetings or not meetings, but just regardless of if there's meetings or not, how much of the work product can be shared with committee members? So whether it's in a meeting or over email, as the draft memo gets reviewed by staff, like for example, can the draft memo be shared with community members they have to opt in? If staff have any kind of major feedback or concerns, could those be shared with the group? I think that's just helpful as folks are thinking about how they want to engage, to get a sense of, is the only way they're going to be able to get future information in a meeting? Then yes, absolutely. If things could be provided, there might be more flexible answers to that question, I would imagine.
Well, we are meeting tomorrow, the WSP team and city staff, so perhaps we'll just debrief then on tonight and we can let you know after that. You know, if Anthony, like, are we able to share kind of where we're going? I don't have a problem with that. I just...
Sorry, Emily, I think Anthony had to drop off.
Oh, did he go? Okay.
But he did say that we would be able to share the draft memo with folks from CCAC.
Okay.
So there will be an opportunity for further review before we come back to council.
Okay, so if it's feasible to all of you, then we can schedule one last meeting before that memo is completed. And then once the memo is completed, because that'll be over the next, you know, less than 2 weeks, we can send that on to the group here for their feedback as well.
And just to confirm, this would be through the working group, not through the entirety of the CCAC.
Correct. Yeah, just those that have been involved up to this point.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, we'll send something out after we meet with the WSP team tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now moving on, 7.3, we have the update from the Office for Climate Change Initiative staff.
So we'll make this really quick, given the time. I had one thing I just wanted to make sure that you all received and just want to draw your attention to, and I know Trevor also wanted to share a reminder. So Beatrice sent out to all of the CCAC a package with some instructions that were hopefully clear around just giving us some input on strategic priority focus areas for the 2025 round of climate change reserve funding. So just wanted to make sure that you all received that email as advisory committee members. And appended to that message, you would also find the reserve policy that guides the climate change reserve and funding, use of funding from the reserve. And then we've also shared the appendix, the detailed appendix that we put together in our 2024 Hamilton's Climate Action Strategy update, just to direct you to actions and updates on actions. And we're really looking for your advice and direction on, you know, what you think should be prioritized for the 2025 round, both with respect to city-led initiatives, but also any advice and input you have, because I know as the CCAC, you did speak a lot, you know, a number of you spoke a lot to community partnerships and initiatives. And so we're just eager to get some input from you on that front. We're hoping that you can share that input with us by end of day March 10th. We're also having some conversations internally with our director level steering committee about this as well. And we'll circle back to you as well, you know, at the end of the day with where we land on strategic priority focus areas for 2025. So I don't know if anyone has questions. I just want to say as well, if you have a chance to look through the material and you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Happy to talk with you about the information that we've shared if you need more explanation or clarification. And I'll hand it over to Trevor for his reminder as well.
Take it away, Trevor.
Thank you, everyone. Trevor Imhoff here, Senior Project Manager of the Office of Climate Change Initiatives. Just really quickly, and Beatrice, I'm going to ask you to remind everyone when you sent that email that people can look back in their inbox. But we are providing a survey to the Climate Change Advisory Committee for pre-engagement activities related to the carbon budget and accounting framework. And hopefully some of you will remember a few months ago, I presented an update on the carbon budget and accounting framework. And some of the feedback I got back was, okay, this is really important, Trevor, but it's very bureaucratic and it sounds like it's only for the city, and how can the community get involved? So this is our response to that, and really wanting to get some input and advice through the survey from the CCAC members about how can we make it more meaningful for the community? What are some ideas? What are some challenges? So I invite everyone to fill out that survey. It should be pretty quick, should be less than 10 minutes to fill out. And it is due ideally by tomorrow, end of day. Any questions? Please let me know. Thanks.
Are there any questions for OCCI staff before we move on with the agenda? I'm seeing one from Gabby.
I just wanted to follow up with regards to the email that Jesse sent out with the rankings, because I think that's a very logical way to start looking at the different kind of co-benefits that can come out of the climate change reserve actions that are funded. So is that something of what you're looking for? Is that what the direction that would be doable on the climate change reserve front?
Yeah, through the chair. So happy to receive that kind of input. Maybe something that we could also do, because at least with the internal process for city-led initiatives, we do already have a scoring ranking framework in place. So we can share the details of that.
Yeah.
If people are interested in commenting on that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think that kind of like finding where there might be opportunities for tweaking that already evaluation framework, bringing in some of the suggestions that was in the Jesse's email, which I think is a very clear way to go forward with this. When we can do some tweaking, like I was looking at a preventative impact, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to also look at it at kind of like it actually helps address systemic issues that we're facing in terms of mitigation, right? So I think there's tweaking that can be done along that, but kind of mixing in this approach along to try and figure out how it fits into the overall evaluation framework makes logical sense for me. Maybe I'm trying to think of how to kind of go about doing that. Maybe we need to have like a little bit of a separate meeting to kind of bring people together in the committee who can then kind of look at the evaluation that is in place at present, what kind of evaluation improvements could be made to it to help address that kind of co-benefits of these actions that are funded, both to meet mitigation, resilience, as well as community benefits, as opposed to just corporate benefits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We can look into doing that. And then as well, I just repeat, at the most fundamental level, we're also eager to hear from all of you about, the types of things that you want to see supported. So I think both of those for sure. We're interested in hearing.
All right. Yeah. And so we should, then a follow-up item from this would be setting up a separate kind of in-depth conversation, looking at the evaluation framework at present and how we can tweak it, and then what other opportunities there are for kind of getting additional synergies in these projects moving forward. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, we can definitely take that away and look at setting up, a smaller group to come together to discuss that. Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing no further questions, so we'll move along to 7.4, working group updates. I will just flag we are running late on time, so I'll just ask for the updates to be as brief as possible so we can get through the entire agenda. So first up is 7.4A, nature-based solutions working group update.
No updates at this time. We haven't met in the intervening time, but we hope to meet coming up in the next few weeks. So we'll be sending around a doodle poll to book that soon. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Juliana. 7.4B, technical and governance working group update. Is anyone providing that update for us? Yes, okay, so we'll move on. 7.4C, community engagement and climate justice working group update. Shelley?
Well, Sue is also here, so she could chime in too. So we had a meeting and Beatrice was kind enough to meet with us. We had previously given feedback from our committee on the climate justice framework, and Beatrice met with us and we discussed it further, and she helped clarify some things that questions that we had. So that was a major part of our February meeting. And then we also discussed, after Beatrice left, just how could we bring our mandate terms of references together now that we are one committee as opposed to two. So That's kind of where we're at now.
Thank you, Shelley. 7.4D, Buildings Working Group update.
Unfortunately, we haven't gotten a chance to meet. I actually had to reach out and do a survey as to who's still participating in the buildings working group and who isn't. I'd be interested to see. I did bring it up with Gabby and the staff, but I'm a little bit confused, I guess, as to who's still participating in the CCAC and who isn't. So if there is a possible way for us to get like an updated list, reach out to other people, just because there are names that I have been reaching out to that I haven't seen in a meeting for quite some time. So that would be helpful, and hopefully we can meet in the upcoming weeks.
Thank you, Mary Luz. So that is all we have in 7.4. And then we also have to move and second receiving all the information reports that we had from 7.1 through to 7.4. Do I have a mover and seconder to receive the information? Moved by Sue, seconded by Gabby. Please raise your hand in favor if you are voting in favor of this. All righty. Are there any opposed? I'm seeing none, so that carries. We have no items for consideration. We have no motions or notices motions yet, but moving on to item 11 for general information and other business. We have topic update that doesn't fit underneath anything else. So the first one, 11.1, building climate awareness, the role of the Climate Change Advisory Committee. And I believe, Gabby, you were going to take it away on this one.
So one of the things that we did kind of give a little teaser on at the last meeting is really trying to get committee members to give some input in terms of what they think would be like what would be the main outcomes that we're trying to achieve with the Climate Change Advisory Committee. So certainly kind of building and providing backup support for the Climate Change Action Plan, but also in terms of like longer term initiatives, how the working groups fit together with the committee as a whole. And one of the things we wanted to find out was what committee members think success would look like. What kind of benefits, like what do you want to see happen with the committee in 2025 so that we can kind of keep a little bit of a better idea? Are we making progress towards our hope for outcomes? So some of these bullets are highlighting some of the kind of possibilities for what success could look like. I will take out the first bullet, just helping to build climate awareness across departments, because really that's the climate change departments. We can certainly help in terms of if there's help, but that I think is well kind of handled by the Climate Change Department. But certainly in terms of kind of identifying and supporting the department and the city in moving with the community and opportunities for community is something that we have heard from committee members is something that would be the role that they see for themselves as this committee. I just wanted to kind of gather some input in terms of what that might look like or what might be the opportunities for it. Certainly building those relationships with the community partners. That was definitely identified from the Climate Change Advisory Committee, that kind of helping to play that go-between matchmaking between the municipality and the community and building in additional stakeholders and unusual stakeholders, so it's not always the same suspects coming to these to this efforts, and also building that stakeholder base within the community on the Climate Change Action Plan was identified as something that's really a role that the committee sees for themselves, or a kind of hope for outcome that they see for themselves. In terms of building up those partnerships with the community assets that are within the City of Hamilton, supporting those community assets, been better enabling them to do the work that they need to do is something that was also identified. There was some talk about hosting a climate fair event, or kind of maybe like using some of the resources that we have available to us. I would like to throw something in there if I possibly can, but maybe there's some role that we also play in bringing climate to existing Hamilton events that are already taking place, rather than expecting them to come to us, reaching out and bringing the climate message and the climate engagement to all the other Hamilton events and what that might look like. But then wanted to kind of identify if there's any input on these bullets? Are we out of line on these bullets? Or is there some gaps that we really should have on our radar of what the committee, hope for outcomes are of the committee?
Does anyone have any comments or discussion on this that Gabby has brought forward? We have a little bit of time. Don't worry. I didn't mean to put the scare into everyone about taking up time. We're moving along. If anyone has anything they want to add on this discussion topic. Yes, please, Shelley.
Sure. I just want, this is a great list. I like how this is going. And the only other thing I would sort of came to mind was developing a network.
Okay.
And something that I've been working on is another group that it's moving slowly because we're all volunteers, but just developing people that are interested in climate justice, climate action, a network so that when stuff does happen, we can connect with one another, or even from time to time come together and do something like a fair.
Okay.
Yeah. And I really think reaching out to some of the Mohawk College and McMaster University and engaging with them too, I think would be really good.
Okay. And can I just ask in terms of just a clarity on terms of the network that you're developing, would that be something would that be part of like bringing in those network people into the working groups based on the certain themes? Is that what you were thinking? Okay.
Possibly, but also sort of outside of that and engaging with them. Maybe we have a question here and we could go to the network.
Okay.
Yep.
Jeff?
Yeah, great, thanks. No, I think this is important. I think this makes a lot of sense just to be sort of more clear about what we see as success coming from this and why we're spending our time doing this. One thing I would note, I heard that there was some discussion at council about funding for, the office, like the reserve, I suppose. And given what's going on, more broadly with tariffs and things like that, I think making the case as to why this needs to still be a priority is going to become more and more important, and showing that this is something that is not a fiscal drag on the community, but actually something that's going to position the community to be more resilient, I think is really important. I don't have all the answers to how we make that case, but I think we can be part of making that case. I think it's really important to be explicit about, we're not just doing it because this is a nice to have thing, or this is a feel-good thing. This is a thing that's going to help. I don't want to be here wasting time either. This is a thing that's hopefully going to help position our community to be more resilient going forward in the face of climate change and the crisis we've got, but also all the economic sort of headwinds that we're going to be facing as well. And this can be something that can hopefully help with that too. So I think we've got to be really intentional and strategic about how we position what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we feel the outcomes are, and sort of making those connections with the broader community and bringing people on so that they see that we're in this for a broader purpose and something we feel is really good for the community in Hamilton in general, and not just because this is a niche thing that we're interested in for our various reasons. Thanks.
Councillor Crutch, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, that was Jeff that was speaking, right?
Yes, that was Jeff.
Hey, Jeff. Yeah, I would encourage us not to box ourselves in, though, or you to box yourself in terms of the things you're going to recommend or how things go with Climate Change Reserve or things through the Office of Climate Change Initiatives. Ultimately, that didn't pass. In fact, one of the motions that came forward was with respect to a Climate Change Reserve motion from 2024. So people weren't even really actively using the process correctly. So I guess I just want to say, hopefully you saw the outcome there. And you're going to see that people are going to continue to support the work we're doing here. And that, yeah, it's been difficult, as Linda has said, and as Trevor has said before, initially when we first got the Climate Change Reserve, to pick projects that were lined up with these the kinds of goals of the committee. But I just want to encourage you, please don't lose the focus and the determination and the passion everyone here has got for doing this, because some councillors said some stuff that they shouldn't have said. They didn't, again, win that vote. They're not going to win that vote. And the work we do here is very important. So I want to encourage you to continue to do it in the ways that make sense to you, that are meaningful to you, and that connect with the reasons you joined this committee in the first place.
Seeing no further speakers, so we'll move on to item 11.2 with 10 minutes to spare in our meeting. Gabby, you're going to take it away on this one too.
So this actually might be relatively quick unless there's we might need to get into a discussion, but there's 2 vacant spots right now on the committee. And what really we wanted to just find out if there was, the question is, do we fill those spots? So maybe what we would probably do is I think we need a motion or something like that, if that's something, but I wanted to kind of get some insights from committee members if they see any unintended consequences associated with filling those vacancies, any kind of issues or anything that we should keep in mind.
Sue, your hand is up if you want to unmute.
Sooner the better. Let's do this. I think we have those 2 open spots, and let's get more people involved. And I don't see any problems with that.
Okay. So if maybe what we'll do then is we'll kind of put a motion out there just in case we need it, just to have a motion that the 2 vacant spots within the Hamilton Climate Change Advisory Committee to be filled based on a process that is already established.
Trevor, I see your hands up as well.
Yeah, just a question for the group to consider as well, because I think there are a lot of positives to bring additional expertise and allow people to participate in this democratic process. The question is, and I guess Beatrice and Lyndon, maybe you can help us answer this if you know, do we have to refill that seat for the sector that seat is represented? So for example, there are 2 seats. One is a citizen seat and one seat is a non-profit organization. And we'd have to look at the terms of reference, but the committee just may want to consider as they go out, as Ian mentioned, there is an existing selection review committee process through council and councillors that need to happen. But I think it would be worth the committee's while to think about the sectors, if possible, to help guide that selection review committee's decision and who they ultimately choose.
Beatrice?
Yeah. So yes, through the chair, we do have to have there are categories. So there's a citizen position, and then there is a nonprofit. So that has to be, we have to work in those parameters. Yeah.
So so we do have to stick within the requirements and the breakdown of the stakeholders that need to be part of the committee.
And that would be involved with interview subcommittee from like you all had that experience, so that's those same people would be involved.
Okay.
Councillors.
And then you'll be able to find out whether we go to the existing contingent or if we have to go through a whole new process. Is that something that we have to figure out, right?
I don't think it will be up to us. It's going to be, it's really.
Okay, there's a formal process on this. Okay. So maybe then what we need to do is just add that to the agenda for the next meeting to when we find out what that process might be, just so we can keep people in the loop on that.
I'm seeing Councillor Wilson.
Okay.
Yeah, the process is as described. I'm not on the GIC selection committee. I'm on the selection committee that selects everything else except this, it seems. But just our process, and Councillor Kretsch is there as well, is, it doesn't meet frequently. So there'll be a time to have that meeting. Then the people who made this decision will say, how are we going to make this decision? Is it worth looking at the list of applicants? How long has it been since people applied? Maybe there was a lot of names. Again, not on that committee, have no idea what the short list looked like. Can't speak, but those would be some of the considerations. A motion would be great to the General Issues Committee asking for this to happen. And if that happens today or if that happens at a future meeting, I think that's up to this committee. Getting the process started couldn't hurt, especially given there will be a delay, like a long kind of start process. A thing to think about is if the terms of reference are suited and if there's a type of expertise that's missing, the committee could move a motion saying, hey, within the existing terms of reference, these are the types of areas we're looking for more representation on, or here's something that we think should be looked at in the terms of reference. Those would be things that could go with that motion as well.
So keeping in mind your point about getting the ball rolling so this can happen because there's timelines that are outside of our control. To me, it's making sense if someone were to bring a motion forward, perhaps right now, where it's very simply something along the lines of, whereas the Climate Change Advisory Committee has 2 empty seats due to voluntary resignations from members, therefore be it resolved that the Climate Change Advisory Committee asks for those 2 seats to be filled. Gabby, would you like to bring that motion forward?
I would like to bring that motion forward.
Would anyone like to second that motion from Gabby?
Sue just did.
See Sue seconding it. So again, we can write it out and we might get a slap on the wrist from not doing this completely appropriately, but I'll say, whereas the Climate Change Advisory Committee has 2 empty seats due to voluntary resignations by members, that therefore be it resolved, the Climate Change Advisory Committee requests for those 2 additional seats to be filled as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Could I see all those in favor? This was moved by Gabby and seconded by Sue. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed. Any abstentions? Seeing no abstentions, so that passes unanimously, and we'll get that written up and properly shared. I have
3 minutes.
No other business on our agenda. Because there's no further business, I will adjourn this meeting at 7:57 p.m. tonight. And thank you so much, everyone. And we don't have to vote to end the meeting. I'm just ending it.
Bye, everyone.